As she stands there, transfixed, I imagine her looking at her own vision of everything that is to play out in her life, all the implications of news she's received. And I find inspiration in her unflinching gaze at the inevitable. She could be saying, this is what it will mean then.
Say something because I'm speechless.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. That was beautiful. Welcome to Ideas on Trial. I'm your host, Leopold Ajami, and I have with me my co-host, Ricardo Pinto. Every episode, we explore and challenge ideas taken for granted. Today, we are putting art on trial, and we have a very special guest to help us explore a new way to experience art. He is the author of Touching the Art, a guide to enjoying art at a museum, and the forthcoming book, Stories in Paint, 50 moving artworks from American museums. And he also taught literature and art appreciation for over 15 years to students of all levels. He is also the founder of Touching the Art, and you can check his work at touchingtheart.com. Luc Travers, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for that introduction. Excited to be here, Leopold. Excited to be here, Ricardo. Can't wait to go on trial and talk about art and putting art on trial.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'm specifically very excited because I want to tell our audience that I've taken one of your courses or experiences on how to read painting. And I have to say, look, it was one of the best experiences in my life. I loved it, really. The way you teach art is sensational. So I want to start by asking you, why? Why art and why this way? What really made you interested in art?
Oh man. So it's because I was interested in philosophy to begin with, and because I saw some things that were not fulfilling in myself. I was a philosophy major to begin with, and then I dropped out of the philosophy program. And I got into art because I started seeing art as a concretization of philosophy. Different time periods, different cultures have artworks that project their view of human beings, their view of what's possible in life. And I would look at a medieval sculpture and say, oh, that's tied into their philosophy. And I'd look at an ancient Greek sculpture and I'd say that's tied in. So I was very interested in the deep ideas that the visual arts could have. I was interested in art history. And then I caught myself being tied to art history almost too much, because I also love movies and music and literature. And I did not feel like I needed art history or the background in order to enjoy a movie like, Life is Beautiful or Braveheart or Casablanca. I simply got into the story. And I found that I couldn't do that with the visual arts, even for my favorites. In my book, Touching the Art, I talk a little bit about my experience going to see Michelangelo's David in person. And I was wowed. I'd studied all about it. I'd taken a Renaissance art history course. I knew everything there was to know about Michelangelo's David. And then after 5 seconds of being impressed, I was like, okay, what now? And the thing that I wanted to do was to go and read more. Let me find out more. And every artwork that I would see while I was there in Florence would be, this is fantastic. I saw it. Now let me get more meaning out of it by reading about the author's biography or reading about the significance of its place in art history or what it meant to the Florentine people, or how does it embody humanism, all these things that were in addition to the artwork. And I felt like there's something missing here. I am not experiencing Michelangelo's David like I would my favorite movie. And so that's when I started to try to figure out for myself, how can I get more out of the visual arts in the same way that I get an experience out of reading The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
I love that. I love that, because that's actually the undisputed idea we want to put on trial, which is, do you need to know about the history of art in order to enjoy art?
So this, spoiler alert, I'm going to say no, but but I think that this is a view that has held for centuries and is, challenged now in some ways with a fundamentally different approach, which I also don't hold to. But I started thinking a little about, okay, why do people hold this view? And does it hold water? Is it legitimate to have the view that when you go to an art museum, you get more out of art if there is a tour guide there who can tell you about the context, who can tell you about the meaning, who give their interpretation? And isn't that going to be more meaningful than just wandering through the galleries of a museum, like staring at things and like having no idea what's going on? Oh, look, another Madonna and Child. I've seen this so many times before. Or what's going on here? I have no idea. And so a lot of people, I think, when they walk into an art museum, feel absolutely lost. And I'll confess to that too. And
I'll confess that too as well.
Yeah.
Even though I love art. But
yeah, exactly.
I think you made it very visual to me, and now I'm remembering that it's really awkward because that's how I learned. If I don't have a tour guide in the museum, I don't know where to look, and I don't know how to look. And for me, I go there with some kind of a naive objective, which is I want to see everything.
Mm-hmm.
I want to look here and here. I want to make sure I see everything. And I don't enjoy it. I'd rather have, I don't know, one artwork in my home or elsewhere, I don't know, just to look at, because it's terrible. But I know that you actually have a certain technique to help people experience art in a museum. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So the approach, well, I think that feeling that you have like you're being overwhelmed, I think that's one reason why a lot of people go to tour guides is, okay, how am I going to narrow down which artworks to pick? And that's the first thing. How are you going to decide what to look at? And if you've got an expert there with you, that makes it a lot easier to do that. Now, that being the first step, picking out which artworks, when you go to a movie, beforehand what you're going to see, or you decide with friends, or with novels, you might get recommendations, or you might say, oh, there's a certain genre I like, but often you don't really know what you're looking for in an art museum. And the thing that I suggest, and this is just like the first step of just the question, how do you decide what to pick if you don't have an expert to help you pick? Be judgmental. Imagine, and this is the key, imagine that you are walking into a place where there are real people that are doing all kinds of things, whether they're slaying dragons or breastfeeding babies or having a village party, whatever it is. But look at those people doing those things and ask yourself, does that look like an activity? Do these look like people that I would want to get to know? And I often go stand in the middle of one gallery, scan around, and immediately start to kind of name the artworks for myself, give them quick titles like, people jumping on the top of a roof. Even if it's something simple like that, even that brief description, you're like, what the heck? And or like, male nude standing, or two armies clashing, whatever it is. When you are immediately giving your own title, rather than looking at the plaque, your own title of the artwork, you are immediately providing some kind of story for it. An implied story where then you can ask questions further. Why is that guy standing there nude? Why are these armies clashing? And then, because you're treating this as a story that you can get into and you're immediately putting your own words to it, you can make decisions, quick decisions like, oh, that appeals to me. Now, sometimes go by your judgment also with what visually appeals to you. Like, I like strong contrast of light and dark, or bright patterns of color. But if you want to get into the story of the artwork, which is something that I had been missing for a long time, give it a quick title and then go to the one that intrigues you. Oh, that male nude looks kind of heroic. I'm intrigued. Let me go to that. And that's how I narrow it down from a huge museum with a bunch of stuff to just picking out a couple. And that's, you know what? I don't need an expert for that. I can do that myself. The expert sometimes, gosh, Leopold, Ricardo, I give a lot of tours, but I try to preface the tours with, I'm giving this tour so you don't have me on a tour anymore,
Yeah.
so that you go to the art museum without a tour guide. And I'll confess something else, that I'm terrible on tours. I can't sit still if I'm on somebody else's tour. I'll wander off. I'm gone
Let me
because I'm
stop you
drawn.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because contrary to, at least to Leopold, and as I can see in your case, I don't get value from the experts, specifically from the tour guides. I don't get value from the pamphlets. I was telling Leopold that on Saturday I went to, and this is beyond painting, beyond sculpture. I went to the opera, I went to see La Boheme, and they always give me these beautiful produced pamphlets, and I never read them. I never read them because they are written in academies. They are not written for normal people. And they give you precisely the approach you're talking about. They talk about the history, its social and cultural significance, its aesthetic significance, but as part of a movement. But they don't tell you much about what's in the work as such, how to judge it as a work of art, period.
And let me add on that, and that's a question. Do you feel, Luke, that this approach kind of corners your imaginations? Like if you have the full context of a painting or an artwork or what have you, does it limit your imagination? Or your curiosity at least?
That's intriguing, and I'm going to hold off on the limiting of imagination, cornering your imagination, just a moment, because I want to get to with Ricardo and then tie it back into what you're saying. So Ricardo, here I'm going to try to make the case for that pamphlet, and I think you already kind of made the case for the pamphlet. You're saying, you know what, the style of the writing is too academic. And that's often the style of writing on pamphlets in museums or in the plaques in museums. It's more interested in, okay, who owned this artwork at what period of time? And then how did it come through? And who are the teachers of this artist? And that's art history niche stuff. It's not something that will help you get into the artwork or get into the opera. And I love opera too. Now, opera, you get music, you get a story,
A plot.
but also, you don't go to a movie with a pamphlet, and you could make the case that it will be very helpful. And you might even say, all right, what are the things that you would need to know to get the most out of the story of La Boheme? Well, you got to know a little bit about 19th century France and the poverty of people at the time period and struggling artists of the time period. You got to know a little bit of Italian, but since you don't know Italian, maybe we'll translate things for you. And then, and maybe if there's some historical figures there, that will help you enjoy the story. Or you mentioned you like Casablanca before the show. We talked a little bit, and if 500 years from now, when somebody comes back to Casablanca, they're going to say, okay, you don't know what World War II was, because there's like World War 17, it's already happened. But World War II, here's what was happening in World War II. And there was, there was Morocco, and it was kind of French. And so you gotta give a little bit of historical context in order to appreciate the story. So I hope I'm making the case for you gotta have the guide here, because they can provide you with that. Yeah.
Can I make it even stronger?
Yeah.
I want to play devil's advocate.
Oh, well,
Me too. I'm itchy.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you're totally unaware of the background, the basic background of the artwork, it may affect whether you grasp the story at all, right? But even more than that, I think there are cases in which the historical background of the work surrounds the total of it. And the example I have in mind is someone like Delacroix, specifically Liberty Leading the People. That is clearly a historical work. And of course, I guess you will argue that you can still enjoy it even though you lack knowledge of the French Revolution and its specifics. But it seems to me that you need to have some knowledge about the particulars of this history to grasp the full meaning of the artwork. And like this, there are many other cases, specifically when it comes to older 19th century works.
I'm gonna make another quick case, and I'm gonna say it this way: give me the analysis after the experience, and I'll tell you why. So, for example, I'm thinking of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the latest movie, Brad Pitt, and I forgot who's the director. But when I watched it, I didn't connect with it. It didn't mean much to me, and it felt like there was really no plot. But then I learned the details about the specific characters. I was like, oh, I get the point, but still I'm not connected, right? So I think that's important because an artwork, whether it's a movie or a painting, it should give you something, even if you don't know nothing about it. And that's why I'm more inclined, if I can say, to Luke's method. I don't know if that you would call it your method, but I want to feel it first, right? I want to experience it first, and then you can give me the analysis. Make sense?
Okay, so
Yeah.
it sounds like you two are having the trial yourselves here. Ricardo, you're saying, all right, so take Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix. And Luke, it's a great painting. It's heroic. And there's this woman who's the bare breast who's like leading the charge, and everybody's following her, and the dead soldiers on the ground. And it's rousing. And well, that's great, Luke. But you know, if I really want to get the full meaning, the full story, the historical importance of this work at the time period, but also to understand who these characters are here and what they're fighting for, then tell me things, Luke, like what's going on in France at the time period? What are they fighting for actually? What is this war that's going on? And so that would be the case for, like, you need the guide there, you need the pamphlet. And Leopold, you're bringing up kind of, here's the sequence of when to get information, and you're saying something like, I want to experience it first and then get to the background details. Now let me ask you this, Leopold, in the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if you had known about the history of the characters and the Brad Pitt character and the Leonardo DiCaprio character and who they were and who they're based on and all that kind of stuff, do you think, and you learned that before you watched the movie, would you have enjoyed the movie more?
I don't think so, because I tried that. I mean, it's hard to go back, but I tried that, and it was missing some of the things that would make me attracted to it, right? From a technical perspective, I didn't enjoy the experience.
Okay, so you, just for my clarity's sake, so you did like learn about the
Yes.
the background before you watched the movie?
No, after.
Oh,
I learned
after.
about it after, but still.
But what if you? Yeah.
I don't know if I learned it before, but I don't think so, because even after I made all the research about it and I watched it again, I was like, oh, okay, I get why they're doing this, but I still don't enjoy the story. It's not an interesting experience.
Yeah. Okay. So you found when you revisited the story after you learned about it, you know what? I didn't get it. I didn't get much fulfillment out of it. And I think what that's illustrating is something that I take heart with art experiences, is that the experience you have marks you more than any analysis or context can provide.
I love that. Can you say that again?
I don't know if I can.
So the experience you have, I love
marks
that.
you more than any analysis or context afterwards can provide. So that's the thing that's going to stick with you. If you see a beautiful girl and you fall in love, that's going to stick with you. And then you learn later on, oh, she's married or things like that. Is like, no, I still had the feeling of that, and that's going to stay with me. So Leopold, I'm going to apply what you're saying kind of to Ricardo's Liberty Leading the People. Now, Ricardo, I don't know if you remember the context the first time you saw the painting, and I got a chance to see it at the Louvre, and it's huge and it's massive, and I don't remember that I knew the historical context much. It caught me by surprise when I learned it's not the French Revolution, but like a later revolution in France, like in the 1830s or something. It's not the 1789 one. So that's you know, that caught me by surprise. But I remember like, wow, this is amazing. It's big. But at the same time, that was just that first impression and didn't really capture in the same way that the David didn't capture me, because there was something that I wasn't doing, that the historical context, that the meaning or interpretation or anything like that could not, that's outside of it, could not provide.
Yeah.
And that thing is your personal connection to what it is that you were experiencing in the artwork, your grasp of the theme of a meaning that you see in the characters there. So I'm gonna like transition a little bit to my case, why the art history, all that stuff is not the primary. You don't need a tour guide there. I think it's important when you see Michelangelo's David, you got to know the Bible story if you're going to kind of get that there's a giant Goliath over there. Now it's kind of implied a little bit, but it adds more. You can picture it in. And the case I'd make against like the art history portion is the relevant parts that you need in order to have the full experience are the parts that will help you understand the story. So there are things about Michelangelo's David that I could tell you about that will be impressive. That will give you more appreciation for Michelangelo. Like, oh, you know what? It's built out of one big block of marble, not many parts put together. And Michelangelo did it like when he was 25 or so years old. I don't know if that's actually true, but nobody thought it was possible. And it was meant initially to be on top of a cathedral. And people loved it so much that they said, no, that's too far away. Let's bring it back down. And Ricardo, I bet that's all kind of interesting, but that doesn't serve the story of the artwork. Now
and
there's
the connection, right?
And we'll get to the connection part. Yeah. Now, if you bring in the Bible story part, you know, young man who's like asked to be the champion for people fighting against Goliath, then that helps you understand. Mm-hmm.
But it can be something different, I guess. It can be a whole army that he's facing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that gets to what Leopold is saying about cornering your imagination a little bit.
And if you think about the liberty leading the people, sure, you can see the French flag, but that's not how most people in the 19th century who took art seriously interpreted it. It was a universal call to arms. And I guess that's how they interpreted also the ideas and the history behind it. But you can enjoy it as a universal story, as a universal message, despite the specifics that tie it to France.
You know what? I'm going to jump in here. Mm-hmm. And you promised us to experience how you teach art, or how you can make us connect with art. So how about we do that? Okay, specifically because Ricardo haven't done that before. So how about
he hasn't? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. And may I just make one quick point about what Ricardo used the word universal about liberty leading the people. And I think that's a brilliant word, because that's the thing that helps you personally connect to the artwork. The fact that it is universal. So you're mentioning in the 19th century that people are looking at liberty leading people as not just French Revolution type stuff, but could apply to any conflict that was going on. There are lots of conflicts and the revolutions in the 19th century. And because it's universal, you can also apply to today and to your life. And that part, Leopold, you mentioned that personal experience, that part of being able to create that kind of personal experiences. Ask yourself, would I follow her, or what would I follow her for? Who do I know in the world now is fighting something like this? Who is raising the flag to defend some ideals? And the more you can think personally about the meaning that you see, the universal meaning that you see, I think that that's more of the genuine, deeper meaning that you'll get from an artwork, rather than how it applies to one particular time period or just the artist.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do the experience. And for the listeners, I just want to tell you, we're going to put the link for the artworks that Luc will share in the show notes. So try to have a look while we're going through this experience.
Okay, so I just want to give you two a heads up. The first question I'm going to ask you is, what's your initial title? What words come to mind when you immediately see it?
So that's the first step. You're going to show us a painting, and then we have to give it a title.
Give it a title. And then I would also want to make sure that it's something that you haven't seen before, because I want to surprise you as much. I think it isn't, and we'll see how it goes. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions to help read the artwork, to pick out what's going on, to see the story and exactly what moment in the story it is. And then after that, I'll share with you any relevant background information that will help you get more out of the story. It'll be like the frosting on the cake.
Yeah.
So we should be able to pick out a lot, but then the parts where like, I'm not quite sure what's going on here, or why is that there? Maybe there might be some questions that are answered by the background story that comes a little bit. And I'll read a little bit from the book. This is a painting from my book, the forthcoming book, Stories in Paint. All right, you ready?
Ready.
Okay, here it is. What are the first words that come to mind?
So first, I haven't seen it before, so that's good.
Me neither.
So you need the title.
I need a title, yeah.
I would say...
Mine is Woman in the Woods.
I would say I Miss You. Or Missing You. Something like
Missing You. How about you, Ricardo?
Woman had to go out.
Woman had to go out. All right, great. Okay, so Ricardo, you're kind of looking at, what's happening here, maybe a little bit the actions taking place. What is she doing? And Leopold, you're drawn to her expression and what that expression could mean. And let's see, I want to ask you a few questions here. And the first question I'm going to ask is, what's going on? What is she doing standing there? Is she looking at anything? And I'll zoom in on her. What is she doing standing here? Is she looking at anything?
I feel that she was busy doing something in her garden, and she was somehow interrupted by either an idea or by something happened from the way she's looking outward. Something happened, but still she's looking up. So that's why I felt she's saying, I miss you. Like she's remembering maybe someone.
Okay, so Leopold, you're looking at this and you're thinking that something distracted her from an activity that she was involved with.
Yeah.
But she isn't looking at anything in particular because her eyes are kind of looking upwards. Rather, she's maybe looking inwardly at some memory of hers.
Or she could be seeing an airplane.
Or she could be seeing an airplane, which would be a bit anachronistic.
Yeah.
I took her to be looking at the horizon without any particular focal point.
Okay, no focal point. So kind of similarly,
and you may argue that that's why she's touching the way she's touching the leaves is not purposeful. She's not grasping them, right? She's just touching them by almost an accident. So I think she's lost in contemplation. I don't know about what, and she's not aware of every one of her movements at the moment.
Oh, lost in contemplation, not aware of movements, and the fact that she's kind of fingering these leaves kind of absent-mindedly really suggests that to you.
She's absent.
Yeah.
I don't know if that means anything, but her face is red, as if she's, I don't want to say blushing, but there's something like why her face is...
Her face looks a little bit redder than the rest of her skin tone. So there's some emotion there going on. Now, if we were in the museum together at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the thing that I'd ask you to do would be to try to take her pose, to feel viscerally in your own body what she's feeling in hers. But maybe you could do that with the upper body here, but the arm jutting out like that and her right hand, how does that feel to you? Does she feel like she's reminiscing fondly of a wonderful days gone by? Or is there a little bit of tension in her torso?
There is tension, maybe hopelessness, I would say. Her posture is not upright. She's sad. She seems to me, I don't know if sad is the right word, but she's wondering.
Sad,
she's not happy for sure.
Wondering. I think those are great words. One thing you might do is just bend your neck like hers. Stretch out and bend it. And you can already feel the tension right there. And look at that arm. And Leopold, I saw you stretch it out, but I didn't think you stretch it out as far as she is, where her shoulder seems to be up as she's jutting it out. And it's ramrod straight. And then there's a kind of twist in her body below here too.
Yeah.
Look at her feet. Do you see how pointing forward while she's twisted around the other way? So there's a lot of tension throughout her body. All right. So whatever she's reminiscing, it's maybe not the most pleasant thing, or whatever she's envisioning. All right. Who else is in this scene?
The Virgin Mary.
The Virgin Mary. Okay.
And a soldier.
Oh, so you're seeing these figures over here.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, at first I thought they're part of the house.
Both are mythical figures.
They seem like shadows or spirits.
So what do you see that makes you say that they're shadows or spirits rather than part of the house?
Because first his head is above the house, so it looks like not part of it. Yeah, even the colors, they don't seem like... I thought it's a painting on the house, like a church or something, but no. They seem to me like spirits floating. Angels. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Maybe angels.
And some of her body parts are missing.
Oh, okay. So maybe some of the body's missing. It's kind of floating angels. And you mentioned the Virgin Mary, Ricardo. What do you see that makes you think Virgin Mary or somebody like that?
Her purity. Her looking after her. And the obviously religious imagery of the halo and the veil.
There's two halos. There's another figure, like a baby or...
Yeah, but is it a baby?
So it's maybe hard to tell. There's another figure with a halo. And then there's a soldier over here too. Now, what is the soldier doing?
He's giving her the sword.
He's dismembered, that's for sure.
Oh, he looks like he might be dismembered, but Leopold, you're saying he's giving her the sword. What do you see that makes you say he's giving, I'm guessing, the living woman, the real life woman, the sword? What do you see that makes you say that?
So I'm assuming that he's giving her or surrendering his sword or something like that, because the way he's holding the sword, he looks like he doesn't want to hurt her. He's giving her the sword to do something with it. Ooh.
Yeah.
What she's gonna do with it?
Okay, so that's a great question. What is she going to do with this sword that's being proffered to her? One more question for you. What does it, are there, if you rewound this scene, if you treat this like a movie and you rewound this scene, do you see any clues that tell us what she had been doing before maybe these angels appeared to her?
I think she was gardening, and if you see in the back, she was in a stool, but she suddenly got up. Yeah, and it was sudden because it fell.
I feel that she was talking to these, let's say, spirits, and then she heard something, or she remembered something, or she just want to have another look before she goes back to them.
So something in the conversation that she had with these spirits who came to her, and maybe Ricardo, like you're saying, maybe she was interrupted by them and she knocked over her stool where she was doing some task over here. But in the conversation she had with them, she moved away to think about, to reflect on maybe what it is that they have said to her.
Oh,
I don't know.
I have an idea.
I wouldn't interpret it as she was having a conversation with them.
Okay, you wouldn't interpret it as she's having a conversation.
No, my story would be that she got the knowledge that her husband, the soldier, died in war. And now she's contemplating her options, her future, her choices. And he's giving her the sword because she's not a gardener anymore. She cannot be kept in her position as a housewife. Now she has a new source of power. And the Virgin Mary, of course, is there to guard her in her new journey.
So here she's you're saying she's just received some news, and I'm going to broaden out a little bit. You're saying you have a particular theory, but I'm broadening it out. So you're saying something like she's just received some traumatic, life-changing news, and she's turned away, not particularly in sadness, not in devastation of having heard this, but you used the phrase, she's contemplating her options now that she's received this news.
Yeah, her future.
Luke, can I jump in? I feel something, which is, I feel that her baby died. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I can see the second halo, and I think it's purposeful that we can't see his face, and it looks like he's putting his face in, he's covering his face with his hands or something like that.
It looks deformed.
Deformed. So it seems to me as if she lost her baby, and I don't know, maybe she want to take her life, and she just want to look at life before she dies, and that's why maybe she's touching the tree, and I don't know. It's beautiful.
So no, this is great. So I want to make a meta point here. Okay. What you're each providing some particular kinds of stories that you're hypothesizing could be happening. Yes. Maybe her husband died. Maybe she lost the baby. And I think that's a great approach to take. And the question always in the back of the mind to reorient yourself to what's going on in the image is, what do I see that makes me say that? Or what evidence do I have? Or where does it lead me? And often with these hypotheses that I constantly come up with too, I end them with a question mark and say, has she just lost a baby? Or has her husband died in war? And what that allows me to do is that allows me to keep going. Because I think one thing we haven't talked about is like the reverse of the idea that you need an expert, which is that art is all subjective and that everybody has their own particular story and scenario to it. And oftentimes you have that feeling because you get really attached to, you have your favorites, you have your taste, you have your interpretation, and you want to hold on to that. And then you get into arguments. What about what is the real meaning of the Batman movie? Oh, is it really a good depiction of heroism or not, or what? And when you're having an art experience, as you're reading an artwork together, I highly recommend having it in mind to be open to seeing more by putting a question mark at the end of your hypotheses. And then the second thing is, in some way, you two agree and seeing the fundamental similarity in what you are both agreeing on gets to the idea that we can all see that is universal. You're both saying that she has gotten some news that is traumatic and life-changing, and now she's envisioning or thinking about what is her next step. So are you ready to hear my reading of the artwork? And I'll provide maybe a little bit of background story in it.
Just let me say this.
Yeah.
I think it's great, and I want to stop on this because this is what we do here. I think it's great the contrast you give to the subjectivist approach to art, in which anything goes, right? And that's, I guess, the alternative people find when they don't want to go by the expert words. But if I interpret your claim, your position correctly, there are elements in the artwork that make some hypotheses plausible and others not, right? And the purpose of you as someone evaluating the work is to see whether your initial reactions, your initial feelings, and your initial stories do correspond to what's given. So we're moving, in a sense, what you're helping us do is to move beyond our initial title, our initial feeling, and get something that it's there, the puzzle that needs to be uncovered.
And I like a lot of what you're saying. The puzzle that needs to be uncovered, move beyond your initial feeling and ask yourself, not in order to make your point to somebody else in a debate, but to refine your experience, to gain clarity, And the more clarity you have, the more certainty you have about what you feel is going on, the more powerful it is. And you can say, yes, that's it, because I see this and this and this. And the more details you see, those details become enriched with meaning. So I'll pause there for just a moment, and because I know we're getting close to, we're on time, but I want to just make this point. You mentioned, Leopold, before about limiting your imagination, and you want to have your imagination heightened. You want to imagine the movement. You want to imagine what it's like to feel like she is feeling in her posture. You even want to imagine, like, what could she be saying? Give her a quote at this moment. You want to imagine all that stuff, and you want to hypothesize, but also you want to be Sherlock Holmes too. Test your hypotheses out. Look at the artwork, pick up the clues, put the puzzle together.
I love that. I love that. So what you're saying is that I should feel it first and then go step by step into putting the clues together of my feelings. Like, why is that happening? What can she say? What if she's doing that? But also look for evidence.
Yeah. It's very similar to reading a Sherlock Holmes novel or Agatha Christie novel. When you read a Hercule Poirot novel, and he's trying to find who killed he got a bunch of people there. You don't know at the beginning of the novel who the murderer is, unless you're doing Columbo, where you do know. But let's take this example of mystery, and suddenly you think it's the cook. No, it's not the cook. There's an alibi, or you think it's the doctor. And as the story unfolds, as the author has you turn these pages, you have new hypotheses that are then tested, and you go through them until you come to the answer. The difference of the visual arts is you don't have the author directing that story for you. You're directing that story as you're coming up with your hypotheses, as you're reading the details of the artwork and piecing together the story of the moment that's happening.
Yeah. Can I just say something here very quickly?
Yeah.
This is so refreshing because it's so rational. And I guess this is true not only of me, but of any rationalist in transition like me, who can usually get much enjoyment from painting, particularly because we don't know what to make with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very well.
That's my case. I mean, you saw my paintings, but painting is probably or has usually been not a favorite form of art precisely because of that, precisely because I lack the language that I can gain by reading a novel or by going to the opera. That's why they are my top forms of art.
Yeah.
But now that you are teaching us this, I look at it from you're rescuing the art for any rational-minded scientific person out there.
And Ricardo, I hope you're also having a bit of a shift in mindset, because I think a lot of people, even when they like art, they approach it as this is a symbol or a representation of some ideas, and they don't think of approaching it like this is a story, like these are real characters going through real things, and let me figure out as much as possible, let me read the artwork. It's just, here's this depiction of this heroic figure, and I'm going to use it as a symbol. And
right, they are not disconnected bunch of themes, like the Penguin Guide to a certain novel.
Yeah. Okay. So
before you read, Luke, I just want to say to our listeners, this is a time where you open the picture, you look at it, and you listen to Luke giving his reading. Go ahead.
Okay, so now here is the official answer, and I'm stressing the sarcasm there because this is my take, and I want to use it. The purpose of the book is to provide a model for how you might approach the visual arts. Now, I do include, like halfway through, a bit of the background story to add frosting to the cake to enhance a little bit. So here we go. A young peasant woman stands by a tree, looking intensely into the distance. It's not just her eyes that are intense. Her jaw is clenched, her neck is strained. One arm juts out awkwardly, her hand absent-mindedly mingling with leaves. the fist of her other hand balled up by her side. Her whole body seems transfixed. What has caused her to be stricken so? Does she see something? Maybe, but her eyes are not narrowed to notice something specific. Perhaps she's seen something in her mind's eye. Behind her, there's a rude farmhouse and some kind of loom with an overturned bench beside it. And hovering around that contraption are ghostly figures. One is a knight in golden armor with a sword. The two others are women, one bent down, weeping into her hands. All have sad expressions, and all have halos. Does she know they're there? Has she already seen them? Perhaps she has. Perhaps that's why the stool is overturned. She was busy at her work when suddenly the angels appeared, and she stumbled back off her chair in shock. She looks in even more shock now. Why is she standing there facing away from them? Have they told her something that has caused her to turn and freeze up with the implications of what she's heard? If it was news, it was not joyous news. The sadness of the angels' faces and her shocked state suggests something of great import has been passed on to her. The golden knight does not wield the sword he holds. He seems to be proffering it. Could this sword be meant for the peasant girl? The young woman is indeed being given the sword and called to take up arms. She has just been told that she will lead her country's armies against the enemy invaders, and more, she will succeed. She will save France. She, Joan of Arc, will be a hero. But the angels have other news too. She will be betrayed by the king she saved and executed as a heretic. In this scene, Joan has heard everything. What is her reaction? Is it devastation like the angel crumpled in anguish? No. Rather, Joan is standing up straight, and she seems to have turned away to process it all. When have you received news that would alter the course of your life, sending it on a path full of challenges? Perhaps you've received a discouraging medical diagnosis, or you've been told a dear family member has passed away, or the pregnancy test came back unexpectedly positive, or you've been promoted to a position of great opportunity that will take you away from your family for several years. In the movie, The Shawshank Redemption, I don't know if, have you guys seen that movie?
Yes.
I remember the look on Andy Dufresne's face. This is towards the beginning, so no spoilers here. Andy Dufresne's face when the jury convicts him of murdering his wife. And in The Lord of the Rings, mild spoiler, I remember when Frodo is told he must be the one to take the One Ring into the hellish land of Mordor. As she stands there, transfixed, I imagine her looking at her own vision of everything that is to play out in her life, all the implications of news she's received. And I find inspiration in her unflinching gaze at the inevitable. She could be saying, this is what it will mean then.
Wow. Wow. Luke, what did you do to me? Wow.
Say something because I'm speechless.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. That was beautiful. Wow. I don't know what to say except thank you. This is beautiful. And I can see now the power of asking questions. It's not about figuring it out by yourself. That's not the exercise. Correct me if I'm wrong. The exercise is, I guess, triggering your imagination and asking questions and delving into this whole world of this character. Become that character, right? And what would you feel? And I guess there's something about universality that Ricardo talked about that you mentioned with the link with Frodo, and I forgot his name in the movie, but
Andy Dufresne.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
what a movie. And I can see it now. And now I'm looking at my life and I'm saying, how many times I felt this way? Maybe not as dramatic as John, but I felt this way many times. And what can I do? And it's beautiful. Now I know, now I can experience how personal that is to me, and I'm sure to all of us. You wanna say something, Ricardo?
Yes, precisely on this question of the universality of it. So it seems very, in a sense, even though this is something you can get more skilled at, it's a method, a process. It seems very common sense. And in your first book, you tell the story of your niece who in a sense taught you the method very like a child would. Why do you think we're not taught this? Do you think, are there any philosophical assumptions, premises that prevent people, both normal people and academics, from reading art in this way and enjoying it in this way?
Yeah, and Ricardo, I think there's a topic for a whole other podcast, but I'll give you a couple of quick details. I think two things come immediately to mind for me. One is the definition of what art is, and the second is the way people think the mind works. So the story you mentioned about my niece, how she sees a statue of a girl with a cat in her lap, and she goes and sits in the cat's lap, and or in the child's lap, and starts to pet the cat. She's doing something that we don't typically do with the visual arts, which is she's suspending disbelief and imagining this as real. This is a story that's happening in front of her, and these are characters that she's going to know. She's not petting bronze, she's petting fur. She's imagining that. And most people think of the visual arts as something that is divorced from story. You get into abstract art or conceptual art, you get, Picasso or Jackson Pollock, and it's not meant to be primarily about depicting a reality, but depicting a style, depicting composition, depicting a mood. And so what you're doing is you're analyzing the arrangement of objects, the colors, but not treating it as a real story. So I think when you start becoming serious about studying art in school, you stop looking at it as if you're trying to immerse yourself into the story. And then I think the second thing is the idea that pervades a lot of art interpretation, which is that everybody has their own individual interpretation. Or I think more today, maybe each group of people or each kind of person, depending on what political affiliation or different subgroup you belong to, will have their own interpretation of something. And so you kind of generates a little bit of fear about trying to make something universal, a shared story that you can then say, oh, I've had that feeling too, because you're not paying attention to the universality of what's happening in the story. So you're limiting it to that person has their experience, and you know what? I'm not going to judge it. I hope that answers a little bit there.
Yes, I think it does, absolutely. And the way I was thinking about it is, what would one of the historical school experts would think when hearing this conversation? Or what would one of the subjectivists think by listening to this conversation? And I think that beyond their rejection or embracing of some sophisticated philosophical principle, there is something that they lack, and it's seriousness. Both the subjectivist and the historical school side lack this seriousness to understand that ideas, stories, and art matter, and that they are life or death. And that is the biggest difference in, I think, their frameworks, in the way they approach art, because they would think that perhaps this conversation is too moralistic, it's too absolute, it's too serious and too strict for the way they have understood their trade and they were taught it. So I think that's one difference by which people lose that inner child that would otherwise help them enjoy art.
Okay, that's interesting. And as you're talking, I'm trying to think. Okay, I really like the exercise you have of, okay, what would somebody who is the art expert side of things, or what would the subjectivist side of things say? And I've never thought of it that way. So I'm imagining myself. I would say maybe the art expert side would say, Luke, you know what? But what about what the artist intended? Yeah, I think they would probably say, you know what you're doing is too subjective. It's not really there in the artwork. If we really want to get to what's there in the artwork, what did Jules Bastien Lepage, the painter of Joan of Arc, intend in that there? And I think that might be the argument there. On the subjectivist side, they might say, well, what about the person who doesn't see a young woman who has just received this news? What about somebody thinking about, this reminds them of their trip to Brittany in France? Or, you know what, those colors make them think of the drapes from their grandmother's home. What about that? Why are you trying to limit it to a certain theme that you're trying to make universal? Why can't you respect each individual's own grasp of what's going on in this artwork? So I think I would be viewed by each as the other. The art history experts would say, oh, you're too subjectivist, and the subjectivist would say, oh, you're too absolutist.
I want to step in here because we're almost out of time. I mean, we're out of time, but I would love to keep on talking, and we're definitely gonna have you for another episode. But I have a last question, quickly, at least to tie everything to the theme of what we're doing in season 2. But before I ask it, I just want to say something to that and to answer what you're talking about, which is, after I've taken your class a couple of months ago, I actually took, and the experience was on a painting called King David, if I'm not mistaken. So I remember I printed it from the internet, and I went to my daughter, who is 3 years old, right? And I told her, Daddy, what do you see? And she looked at the painting and she said, what happened? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you see? And she's like, Daddy, what happened? Why he's sad? And I think this is the whole issue, that she's asking, and she's 3, right? She's asking, what happened? And I think that's what we need to learn. Now, whether we have your interpretation or not, I think that's an added value. But primarily is for us to ask the question, and that's how I guess we enjoy art. And you proved it today. I mean, I loved the session. But having said that, the last question I want to ask you is, just briefly from your experience, because I know you've worked with so many students from all levels and from all ages. What do you think is the effect of art, and specifically reading art, the way you do it? What do you think is the effect on building our character? Does reading art help us form or build our character? And if yes, how?
Yeah, so quick answer to this, which also I think is a whole podcast topic as well. I will say 2 words: introspection and empathy. So reading art, you're looking and trying to figure out what the story is going on, and you're developing a method, and that's like a scientific approach. You're looking outwards, but then also you got to reflect. And there were some questions in a Joan of Arc painting that I was asking, like, okay, when have you had a moment like this? And that those kinds of questions, that the situation the character is going through, invite you to reflect on similar situations in your life, so you can think to yourself, okay, what are the moments like this? And you can take the opportunity to use the artwork as a kind of prompt to reflect on those things. And also then it's not just a prompt to go off into psychological self-study, but also you bring those emotions and those situations back to the painting, and you understand Joan better. You feel for her, and that's the empathy part. You can tell Joan, I know what you're going through right now. Maybe not on the scale you have, but I can connect with you as best I can, because this is something that happened to me in my life where I got this kind of difficult news, and I needed to reflect on what my options were. And those two things, that opportunity to introspect, to reflect on yourself, who you are, how you would react in these situations, and then empathy, to connect with somebody else, to put yourself in their shoes, which I don't know much, but I have a strong feeling, and this is maybe a topic to explore, that is one very important key to developing your own character.
Yes, absolutely.
So
that's an excellent answer, Luke. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful experience. And we're definitely going to have you again on our podcast. And thank you for our listener for listening today. And please don't forget to check Luke's website, touchingtheart.com. Thank you so much.
thank you, Leopold. Thank you, Ricardo.